Now, in terms of taking the club back, so right away we can see you tend to pull the club really inside with a lot of upper body movement, not quite a lot of hip turn. This is starting the problem with the chain that you experience, which is basically where your upper body is a little too active at the start of the takeaway and the lower body is not quite enough. And usually when we see the upper body moving so much and the lower body not quite moving enough, this is going to snowball into problems that you're going to experience later, which we're going to talk about. So in an ideal world, I would love to see you opening up the hips a little bit better and then actually keeping the hands and arms from rotating open and being so active at the start of the backswing. Now, by the time you get to the top, like I mentioned, a lot of upper body turn relative to the lower half. So the problem is when we torque our upper body so much and we don't quite match it with the lower body opening up well enough or soon enough, this will usually build a lot of tension into the golf swing that the golfer will typically want to release a little bit later on. So what does that mean? It basically means that where your hands are here, and what happens into your downswing is you go from the position where you have a lot of early forearm roll this way, which I spoke about, right? So this is really what gets the club working really inside, is the fact that you have this hands and arms rotating open without necessarily the use of a good hip turn. And then by the time you get to the top, because you've acted with your upper body so much and because the forearms rotated open, you are going to see a reaction from the forearms into your transition. And this is why you strike the ball quite consistently off the toe. This is why you struggle with your low point, which is basically your forearms go from rotating open in the backswing and really torquing the chest to reacting the other way in transition, meaning the forearms then rotate the other way on the way down, and this creates a big steepening move to the club. So to me, this is really the main concern, right? If we were to like hyper focus on one area, it's the fact that these forearms, the way they move in transition are really keeping the club way too steep coming down. And when the hands and arms get way too active into the transition, again, because of what's happening on the way back, the shaft is just way too steep here. In an ideal world, which I'm sure you've seen a lot from players online, we would love to see this club come from a shallower position, which would typically clean up the strike. It would allow you to control the low point better, and really it would allow your body to move a little bit more freely through the ball, so not needing to compensate so much. The problem is when you've created this type of takeaway where the forearms are really rotating open and we're not quite using our legs well, we end up in a situation where now the upper body is going to be a little too active into the transition and the forearms are going to react to how you open them up at the start of the backswing, and that just steepens the club big time. So coming down, the club comes down very steep with the face being very shut and you come crashing down into the ball. It's almost like, hitting down with an axe onto the golf ball. And usually when a golfer is going to come down as steep as you are and the club face is going to be as close as yours is, it makes it really hard to control the low point when the club head is outside the hands. That's why you wipe across it and toe it a lot, and that's really why you struggle with your low point control. It's really easy to react to the steepness. Sometimes you'll react to it well enough and you'll hit behind it. Sometimes you won't. There's just a lot of timing in that, which I'll clarify visually for you, so don't stress that part too much. And really, that kind of reactionary movements you're doing is why you're struggling so much from this view. So I would love to see, you can even see here how much your body is like tilted down into the right and hanging back on it. This usually is a reaction from your body to the steepness of the club, which is why your low point control isn't as good as it needs to be. So to simplify, we would love to get you to stop hanging back with the chest. In order to do that, we need to get the club in a shallower position. In order to do that, we need to get to the top differently. In order to do that, we need to clean up the takeaway. So the start of the whole chain of where your problems experience, a little bit of it comes from the setup. A lot of it comes from the takeaway, which is what we're going to focus on in this first main lesson here. And then from the front view, the one thing that I'm not crazy about is you have too much shaft lean, in my opinion. We've done a lot of testing on 3D of all sorts of different tour players. The most amount of shaft lean I've ever seen is about 7 degrees at setup. All right, so you can see here, which I'll show you in a second, 7 degrees at setup is a lot more marginal than most people tend to think. So here in this situation, that's about 11 degrees of shaft lean, right? If we're analyzing this, so we can do it this way, this would probably be a better indicator of that. About 9-10 degrees of shaft lean is too much. So we want to try to get those hands setting up a little bit more in the middle of your feet, right? So that your shaft lean isn't as aggressive. We don't need to basically have the hands so preset forward in the setup position, because that amount of shaft lean is going to create a little too much digging with the leading edge into the ground. I also believe long term your grip is way too strong. I can understand when you're really steep and hanging back on it that the shut club face can help you to not like just hit a power slice. But as we're going to work through getting your pattern cleaner and not stalling out and coming down steep on it or anything like that, the grip doesn't need to be as strong. So it's certainly possible in this first lesson we're going to weaken this a little bit to start the chain off a little bit better, and then we'll work through the backswing. Obviously, we can't clean up everything at once. We need to be realistic, but we're going to set the tone with a better setup position, better grip, better backswing structure, and then from there, we can start to focus on the downswing. But a lot of the downswing is going to change organically as well through us making these changes.